And when you look at the 25 billion, it's not going to make that any better. No matter which way you slice and dice it, it's serious. Now, we've done a lot of borrowing. That's always when it's too tough to face the music and make cuts or find new revenues, then borrowing becomes one path. I asked the Treasurer, Bill Lockyer, to explain what our situation when it comes to borrowing.
Thank you, Governor, and I want to add my voice to thanks for, I guess we're supposed to say Governor-elect, even though you were governor once before, still. I'm glad that you've initiated this effort to communicate with the public about our fiscal circumstance, and obviously the communication matters. Every good teacher knows that the best answers are ones that we discover together. So, as a person responsible for selling bonds, among other parts of my job, I get to talk about the debt circumstances. So let's look at the first chart, which shows you that our outstanding debt has increased by 266% in the last 7.5 years, from about 34 billion in 03 to 91 billion today. I should note that much of the increase is attributable to making investments in California's declining infrastructure. Governor Schwarzenegger went to the voters and asked them to make those investments, and of course they agreed. I should also mention that those infrastructure spending financed by these bonds have created tens of thousands of jobs in the private sector, largely that have helped our communities. Look at the second chart, if you will. It shows how the increase in outstanding debt has impacted our state budget. Over the 7-year period, expenditures from the general fund to pay principal and interest have grown from about $2.5 billion to almost $6 billion a year. As a percentage of the general fund, debt service payments have grown 3.5% of the general fund to 6.5% of the general fund. So of course, every dollar you spend that way is a dollar you don't have available to educate kids or provide health care or whatever. The next chart shows how much debt has been authorized by the voters and legislature, which we haven't yet gone to market with. And we have $37 billion worth of bonds for a variety of things, as indicated, that have been approved by voters and haven't yet been sold, and another $17 billion that have been authorized by the legislature. So $54 billion in available debt issuance. And then, of course, you'll note that the share of the general fund consumed by debt service payments will continue to grow. So it will probably peak in 2 years at 10% plus, and then range in the 7.5% to 10% the subsequent several years. So then if you look at what do investors think about California's credit, you see here, looking at the largest similarly situated states, that even though we're the 8th largest economy on the planet, we have the worst credit rating of any of the 50 states. The rating agencies comment on reasons for that, and you'll see highlighted reliance on one-time solutions, deficit borrowing, persistent structural imbalances, insufficient financial liquidity, inflexibility imposed by voter initiatives and partisan policy-making environment. We worry that we could be downgraded further if there aren't genuine balanced budgets adopted in the future. The next slide simply talks about the expectation of the investor communities and what they would hope to see that will make a difference in this respect. Progress toward resolving the structural mismatch between revenue and expenditures, and if we continue to have an unwillingness to tackle difficult problems, it could cause a downgrade if we see a loss of legislative or administrative resolve. Well, Let me talk for a moment on the next slide about what does this mean to taxpayers. Forget the squiggly line for a moment and let me just kind of summarize, which is when we borrow in California, we're paying 1.10% higher interest rates on our bonds than they would if our state were rated, like many others, as AAA. Now that's a huge amount of money. If the currently authorized GO debt of $37 billion and the legislative authorized expenditures or bonds of 17 were issued, that amounts to more than $12 billion a year. $12 billion over the life of those bonds. Extra costs each year. It varies how much it would cost, but it's substantial, and we're paying a lot because of our credit rating problem. So if I could mention what the expectations and hopes are in closing, it's simply things you've heard from me before, and I apologize for being kind of the town grouch about these matters, but it's lose the gimmicks, honest budget solutions, accurate revenue projections, no more deficit borrowing, better mid-year adjustment mechanisms to ensure an adequate cash flow. Think longer when it comes to budget planning and prioritizing. I know it's easy to say those things, harder to do, but that's what we are challenged to do. Thank you.